Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Dawn, also known as Dragon Rider, and we are going to be talking all about some mage cards and potential new mage decks coming out in Fraction and Alterac Valley. So, without further ado, let's jump in. All right, so as I've been doing, I'm going to do two decks. I tried to stay away from Quest Mage. We've already been seeing and playing Quest Mage. These decks may not be as viable while Quest Mage is still in standard. I don't know. I think one of them has more potential than the other one. So let's get into these. The first one is Big Spell Mage. It definitely seems like they're adding a lot of support for it. A lot of those cards are definitely included. So my overall thinking with this deck was, of course, start with all of the big spells, right? The big spell cards, the big spell support cards. So things like Gray Sage Parrot, the Clumsy Courier, even the Celestial Ink Set are all kind of more of the support for this deck. There's a couple of kind of filler cards as well that I put in that I think will work really well with this deck. One of those is this new legendary Belinda Stonehearth. Yeah, you're going to get to draw two spells, swap their cost with the minion stats. So ideally, the thinking is you draw these big spells, and then the spells get cheaper and her stats increase. So seems like a win-win. Now, one of the tricky things with this deck, I feel like, is it seemed pretty easy to dump all of like the big spells in, some of those support cards, but then filling in the rest of the 30 cards felt a little awkward. You don't really want to be playing a lot of low cost spells, but it almost felt unavoidable. It didn't feel like there's a lot of early minions that I want to be playing instead of spells. So I did include a couple of low cost spells. One copy of Siphon Mana, just deal 2 damage. There's the potential upside of being able to discount the spells in my hand, which does seem great for all of the big spells that I have, as well as it is an arcane spell, which isn't as relevant here. Maybe it will come into play if you put in an alternate card. 2 copies of Build a Snowman. The base, it is a 3 cost card, but then it's going to put a 6 cost and then a 9 cost into your hand. So the first copy that you play will be a lower costed card, but then the other ones you get will be right in line with what the deck wants to do with those big spells. And then the other kind of big important card that I feel like I definitely had to include was Incanter's Flow. Yes, there are some minions in here, but I feel like even just being able to discount some of those big spells is going to feel pretty good. And let's talk about the couple of cards that I considered putting in. One of them is Refreshing Spring Water. It is at that 5 mana. A couple of cards, you refresh mana for spells, but there's a couple of problems that I feel like with this deck why I didn't include it. There are a decent amount of minions in the deck, and with such a heavy deck, I did worry a little bit about potential hand size. If you get this in the deck, you play it, you draw a couple cards, and they're just really high cost cards that you can't do anything with, then your hand might be too full. So I didn't want to risk that, so I decided not to include it. The other big spell that I did not include that I would consider would actually be the Mass Polymorph. I feel like I could probably put one of these in, but I decided not to for the initial deck. I think this might be more of a meta call. So I decided not to include it in the first kind of iteration of this deck. Felt like maybe there's not really going to be value if you end up playing something and it pulls this out of your hand or pulls it out of your deck and there's not really anything on board, or if you're the only one with minions, it kind of feels bad. So I just decided against it. And these other two are very similar, so I'll kind of talk about them. The couple of cards is the new hero, which is Magister Dawngrasp, as well as Multicaster for additional draw. Now, again, I feel like there's already some decent draw in here, but I didn't want to go too crazy with the draw because with things being a little bit higher costed, I didn't want to just have so much draw in the deck that it would just draw you a big hand of stuff that you couldn't do anything with. The Magister Dawngrasp is also a little interesting, but I wasn't sure. I did add in the 1 copy of Siphon Mana, and I'm playing the Incanter's Flow, so those are arcane, and then there are some frost spells a shadow spell. Some of these bigger spells actually don't have a spell school, and I didn't know if I wanted to put in more of that kind of RNG aspect because there already is some RNG with the Rune of the Archmage casting spells. So I kind of just decided to not go with the hero card for the initial deck and kind of see how it went. Now, the second deck that I put together, I'm going to call Fire and Ice Mage. And as the name implies, it is running a bunch of like frost and fire spells. Again, I tried to stay away from like Quest Mage. I tried to come up with something different. I don't think this is going to get played instead of Quest Mage. If you're looking for a bit of a variety on playing some of those spells, this I feel like is a deck that kind of goes off of a couple different synergies. Obviously, there are frost and fire spells, but there's a lot of synergies within that. And I felt like a lot of it actually ended up being things like build a snowman, kind of just creating minions and using minions along with the spells. Whereas like the quest mage just utilizes spells and it's not really playing any minions. So some of those include this Frostweave Dungeoneer for drawing a spell, potential upside if it's a frost spell. The Snowblind Harpy gets some armor if you're holding a frost spell. This is kind of in place in this deck of Ice Barrier. You're not getting quite as much armor. You're getting 5 instead of 8, but you're also getting a body on the board. So there's kind of that little bit of difference. And then I really wanted to try out this Frozen Mammoth. Very low cost and great stats for the cost, but there's already going to be fire spells that you're playing, even some cheap ones like Hot Streak. So it feels like you can pretty easily unfreeze that and have a great body on the board. And this deck, I did include that Magister Dawn Grasp. There's a few arcane spells I put in, even though it's mostly focused on the fire and frost. But I put in a couple just to give the multicasters and the Dawn Grasp a little bit more consistency. One other thing that I wanted to talk about with this deck is it actually does seem fairly low curve. So there is what feels like a lot of draw in here. Again, with the Frostweaver Dungeoneer, the multicasters, Herald of La Colar, there's just a lot of draw mechanic in here. Ideally, should be able to draw through the deck fairly consistently, try to cycle through some of that stuff and find some of those tools, potentially even play the hero on curve on turn 8 after playing multiple different spell schools. Now, this one feels kind of like a mix of a deck where you are probably trying to win via a mix of the board and spells. Again, I don't think this one is going to be like insanely strong or powerful, but it's kind of got a mix here. And in terms of alternate cards that I considered for this deck, potentially even a little bit more draw to help cycle would be another option. Something like Arcane Intellect, maybe even the Refreshing Spring Water would be some pretty good options. And if you really want to continue with the kind of little bit of RNG stuff, I could even potentially see just topping the deck off with even like a Mask of Cthulhu or that Rune of the Archmage, even for just more burst damage, maybe even just playing a Mr. Smite to try to help closing out the game and finishing off last damage that you might need to do. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed these mage decks. Let me know in those comments below if you are going to give these a try, what mage decks you would like to see, what you're going to play, all of that. Love to hear about it in the comments. And if you haven't already, would love to have you subscribe. And if you can, also give a thumbs up to this video to help other people find it as well. And if you want to see even more great content like this, make sure to check out these videos and playlists off to the side here.